Welcome back, focused learners, to another explainer from the Success Debriefs. Today, we're diving into something absolutely crucial. We are going to debrief the core principles behind Dr. Peter Attia's public framework on longevity. Now, if you aren't familiar, Dr. Attia is a Stanford and Johns Hopkins trained physician, a leading longevity expert, and the author of the massive book, Outlive. We're going to break down his framework using pure source-backed data from some of the top health organizations in the world. So get ready, because we are unpacking the exact rules that separate a body that simply survives from a body that actually thrives. I really want you to ask yourself, are you waiting until your health breaks to fix it? Because let's be honest, that is the standard medical model we've all been handed. I mean, we proactively take our cars in for a 10,000-mile oil change, right? Yet we wait until our own biological engine literally explodes before we see a doctor. We wait for the heart attack, or the scary diagnosis, or the bad fall, and only then do we react. We just treat the disease. But true longevity doesn't work that way. It requires you to train for the life you want long before the crisis ever hits. Okay, let's dive into this. Let's look at the actual data to see precisely why this reactive model is failing us. Looking at recent numbers from the CDC, we get a clear snapshot of U.S. adults and their cardiovascular risk factors. We're talking things like high blood pressure, high BMI, elevated blood glucose. Only 36.4% of adults have zero risk factors. Think about that for a second. That means nearly 2/3 of adults are walking around right now with at least one cardiovascular risk factor, and almost 29% have two or more. If we wait for these factors to turn into outright emergencies, we've waited way too long. So we need a proactive playbook. Here is our agenda for today's debrief. 1. Health span over lifespan. 2. Exercise, the longevity drug. 3. Strength and VO2 max. 4. Sleep and nutrition. 5. Track the health dashboard. And 6. Train for old age. Let's start with rule number 1. Health span over lifespan. The foundational point here is understanding the difference between lifespan and health span. Look, lifespan is just the chronological length of your life, how many years you're actually breathing. But health span, that represents the years of your life that are free of disability and chronic disease. It's your functional independence. There's a massive difference between blowing out 90 candles sitting in a wheelchair versus getting down on the floor to play with your great-grandkids at 90. Optimization is about maximizing that health span right up to the very end of your lifespan. Which brings us to rule number 2, exercise, the longevity drug. And this brilliantly illustrates a really surprising fact. You absolutely do not need to be an elite athlete to see massive benefits. In fact, a landmark study published in The Lancet showed that moving from zero exercise to a mere 90 minutes of physical activity per week is associated with a 14% reduction in all-cause mortality. Guys, that's just over 10 minutes a day. You don't need perfection to start improving your longevity. You just need to stop being entirely inactive. To grab the absolute most health benefits, the blueprint from the Department of Health and Human Services is incredibly clear. First off, stop sitting so much and just move more throughout the day. Second, aim for 150 to 300 minutes of moderate aerobic activity per week. Think brisk walking. And third, you've got to include muscle strengthening activities at least 2 days a week. As researchers continuously point out, physical inactivity literally cannot be treated by medications. You just have to put in the work. So let's get specific about that work. Rule number 3, strength and VO2 max. First, let's talk about VO2 max. This is basically the gold standard measurement for cardiorespiratory fitness. It defines your circulatory and respiratory system's ability to supply oxygen to your skeletal muscles while you're working hard. Think of your VO2 max as the actual size of your body's engine. It's how much oxygen it can pull in and use when you're pushing your limits. The data on this is so overwhelming that the American Heart Association now strongly advocates treating cardiorespiratory fitness as a routine clinical vital sign, literally right alongside your blood pressure and heart rate. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how incredibly small improvements yield outsized returns. We measure these improvements in something called metabolic equivalence, or METs. When you increase your VO2 max by just one single MET, your risk of dying from major chronic diseases completely plummets. Check out the exact numbers from clinical exercise physiologists Dr. Pierre Boulez and Dr. Glenn Kenny. Just a 1 MET increase in your fitness level delivers a 12% reduction in all-cause mortality, a 14% reduction in cancer mortality, and a massive 16% reduction in cardiovascular mortality. And the best part? These benefits apply whether you are perfectly healthy right now or if you're actively managing conditions like hypertension and diabetes. But listen, aerobic fitness is only half the equation. You absolutely must also maintain muscle. And here is a pretty shocking physiological fact from the National Strength and Conditioning Association. As we age, the rate at which our muscle strength declines is actually 2 to 5 times greater than the decline in our muscle size. This means you can look like you have the exact same muscle mass in the mirror, but beneath the surface, your functional performance and power are rapidly fading away. This brings us to a really profound conclusion. The NSCA states that thresholds of clinically relevant muscle weakness have now been established as a biomarker of age-related disability and early mortality. I want you to think of building strength not as some cosmetic pursuit, but as literal retirement planning for your body. The muscle you build today is the functional buffer that will protect you against falls and mobility impairments in your later decades. Next up, rule number 4, sleep and nutrition. We need to stop viewing diets and sleep hacks as these trendy lifestyle fads and start respecting them for what they actually are: critical biological maintenance systems. Look at the research. Sleep is an active state, not passive downtime. Studies show that adequate sleep actively promotes brain cortical thickness, while genes involved in metabolism directly link to our sleep duration. You are physically repairing your brain and metabolic pathways when you sleep. On the nutrition side, USDA guidelines are clear. You don't need some extreme crazy diet. You need a nutrient-dense dietary pattern that strictly limits added sugars, saturated fats, and sodium. And crucially, we have to include emotional health in this maintenance protocol. Chronic stress physically degrades these exact same systems. Managing your emotional well-being is an equally vital part of your baseline biological maintenance. But how do you actually know if your maintenance is working? That's rule number 5. Track the health dashboard, because you cannot optimize what you do not measure. This right here is the American Heart Association's Life's Essential 8. It is the ultimate objective checklist to stratify and manage your cardiovascular risk. It's divided into health factors, your blood pressure, lipids, glucose, and BMI, and behavioral factors, your diet, physical activity, tobacco exposure, and sleep. You should know these numbers as well as you know the balance in your checking account. Do you know your current blood pressure or glucose levels? Because if not, you are flying blind. This is the dashboard that tells you if your longevity strategy is actually working in the real world. Let's move to and see how this builds rule number 6. Train for old age. Everything we've discussed today, your VO2 max, your strength, sleep, emotional health, tracking your dashboard, it all culminates in this one core idea: physiological resilience. Look, aging, even perfectly healthy aging, brings a decline in functional ability. That's just a fact. But if you raise your baseline high enough today, that inevitable decline won't drop you beneath the threshold of independence. You're proactively building a body right now that can still hike, play with grandchildren, travel, and live the incredibly vibrant life you want decades from now. I want to leave you with this highly empowering quote from the NSCA. Poor health, disability, and dependency do not have to be inevitable consequences of aging. If you act early, if you train your body, measure your metrics, and treat your sleep, nutrition, and emotional health like the biological necessities they are, you get to dictate the terms of your future. Decline is only a foregone conclusion if you refuse to train for it. So, I'll ask you today, are you building a body to merely survive your final decades in a hospital bed, or are you building a body to conquer them? The data's right there, the framework is proven, and the rest is entirely up to you. Success leaves clues. We debrief them. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and keep building your health span.